Hey guys, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 6 of my Music Theory for Producers course. In this video, I want to take a look at the major scale and major key structure and show you how to form any major scale and any major key, as well as the chords within that key off of any root note, and just basically memorizing a pattern of whole steps and half steps. So let's start there. Let's talk about what whole steps and half steps are. We already briefly talked about the semitone, and I refer to it as a half step as well. So a half step is essentially when you start on any note, and then you go up or down by one key. Now, I don't mean going from C to D here, because there's actually a note in between here. So the interval between C and C sharp here is a half step. Likewise, going from C sharp up to D is also a half step or semitone. Going from D to D sharp, that's also one. Going from E to F, because there's no black key in between these, that's also a half step. A whole step is when you go from one note to another, but you leave a note in between. So going from C to D is a whole step. So C to C sharp is a half step. C to D is a whole step. So if you take those two types of basic intervals and you apply this structure to it, so it says the major scale can be constructed by following this interval pattern above any given note. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's the pattern. So let's try following that. So here's C. A whole step above that is D. A whole step above that is E. A half step above that is F. A whole step above that is G. A whole step above G is A. A whole step above A is B. A half step above B is C. And there we go. We have the C major scale. The thing that's simple about C major is it's all white keys on the piano. It's very simple. C major is the only major scale that's going to have all white keys. The rest of them will all have sharps or flats in them, and I'll tell you how to determine whether they're supposed to be sharps or flats in just a moment. But for now, let's take a look at, let's try doing D major. I've got the answer right here, but let's figure it out, again, using the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half method. So let's start on D. So a whole step above D is E. A whole step above E is F sharp. So whole, whole, and then half is G. A whole step above G is A. A whole step above A is B. A whole step above B is C sharp. And then a half step above C sharp is D. We've got our D major scale. So we've determined that in the key of D major, there were two sharps that we encountered, two sharp keys, two black keys that we encountered, F sharp and C sharp. And then the rest of the keys are all white keys. How do we know to call these F sharp and C sharp rather than calling them G flat and D flat? Well, the answer is very simple. When you construct a scale, you have to move upward alphabetically. So at the end of the day, if we get rid of the sharp symbol, we basically have D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. And then two of the notes have sharps on them. We can't call this G flat because we already have a G natural in the key of D major. So when we already have a G in the key, you have to go to the sharp. That's sort of the rule. And by the way, there's another tool that we're going to use a few videos down the road called the circle of fifths that, believe it or not, makes all of this easier. But I want to show you guys how to construct scales this way first, just so you can see that the structure of every single major scale is identical. So let's do one with flats. Let's do it on purpose. I know for a fact that the E flat major scale has flats in it. So let's go back to our keyboard here And let's figure out E flat major using the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half method. So E flat, F up a whole, G up a whole, A flat is up a half, up a whole step from A flat is B flat now, and then a whole step again is C, a whole step again is D, and then a half step is E flat. Now another dead giveaway to know whether it's supposed to be flats or sharps is that if the scale starts with a flatted note, it's going to have all flats. If it starts with a sharp, it's going to have sharps. If it starts with a natural, it can be either or. But even if this note started with a natural note and we ended up going with a flat over a sharp, we would know then that the rest of the accidentals were all going to be flats, not sharps. So you can't normally. There's a few exceptions when we get into some of the variations of minor scales, but you can't normally, at least with major scales, you can't have sharps and flats in the same scale. It just doesn't happen. So again, let me play this for you. E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. So again, follows that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half method. Let's try one more. Let's do A major. So here's A. Up a whole step is B. Up another whole step is C sharp. Up a half step is D. Up a whole step is E. Another whole step is F sharp. Up another whole step is G sharp. And then finally the half step is A. So again, we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So that's the way you can figure out any scale, any major scale from that pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Don't forget it. Again here, for this scale, we started A, B. How did we know to call the third note C sharp over D flat? Well, we could just keep that on the back burner. This is either C sharp or D flat. But then when we get to the next note, it's D. So we know we can't call this D flat. Otherwise we'd have A, B, D flat, D. You want to have a C in there. A, B, C sharp, D. You don't want to repeat the note name at all. Okay, so one other thing that we're only going to just briefly touch on, and I'm only going to do it in C major for this example because there's another way to construct these easier down the road when we get to that point. If you know the scale, the reference scale for your piece of music, your song, you essentially know the key of the song. The key of the song typically matches the scale of the song. So basically the scale or the key restricts the actual notes that you're going to use in the song. That goes for your vocal melodies, that goes for synthesizer melodies, and that also goes for the chords, any chordal instruments, any chord progressions that you have. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have some notes be like sort of additional tones within the song to kind of juice up the harmony a little bit, but it gives you a rough starting point so that you know every single note that song is going to contain, or every single chord that song can contain. It doesn't mean that you have to use all of them. It just means that it sort of limits the notes that you're going to use. Take a look at just the C major scale and chords within key triads. Now, a triad is a chord with 3 notes. You can see here that our first chord is C, E, G. The next one is D, F, A. The next one is E, G, B. Notice that the bottom note of every single one of these chords is the C major scale that we have drawn over here. If you simply stack what are called thirds on top of each starting note in the scale, you can figure out a rough guideline for what chords you can use in that song in that particular key. Now, we haven't really gotten into intervals other than the whole step and half step thing yet, but a third is when you go up, I'll say diatonically, that means within the scale, 3 notes up. It's really 2 notes up, but like for instance, if you look at this, it's C and then E is the middle note. 1, 2, 3. C, 2, 3, E. So it's like the third note in the scale. And then if you go up another third note in the scale, 1, 2, 3, you get to G. So C, E, G. C and E are thirds, E and G are thirds. And you can see here our chord is C, E, G. The easy way to do it is just simply draw out your scale and then add notes above each note in the scale on each line or space. So you can see the C major chord here is C, E, G, line, line, line. D minor here is D, F, A, space, space, space. Line, 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 space, space, space. Line, 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 space, 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 all the way up. That's one way to do it. The only thing that gets complicated, and C major is very easy to figure out because there's no sharps and no flats, is when you run into, which is almost always, when you run into a scale that has sharps or flats in it, especially when there's a lot of them. Like D major here, we said has 2 sharps in it, F sharp and C sharp. Well, when you draw out your scale here, and then you add your thirds, space, 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 line, 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 on top of every single note, you're going to run into some chords that have Fs and Cs in them. And you're going to have to go through each chord and make sure it does or doesn't have any Fs or Cs. If it has an F or a C, you have to sharp it. So you can see that our D major chord here is not just D, F, A, it's D, F sharp, A. So you have to add that sharp. That's a result of the D major scale. It doesn't just apply to the scale itself, it also applies to notes within the chords. So like our third chord here started on F sharp, and you draw your thirds on top of it. See if F sharp, A, C, and then that C has to become a sharp because it's designated by the key of D major. And then so forth and so on all the way up. Also notice, and I know we haven't really talked about the chord qualities yet and the types of chords yet, but there's 4 basic types of chords of triads. You have major triads, minor triads, diminished triads, and augmented triads. These aren't really going to become super useful for you to know right now. In a few videos, they'll become a little bit more relevant. Especially the augmented triad is not going to be anything to us for a few videos down the road. But notice that the pattern of the chords or triads, it remains the same for every single scale, every single major scale, using this method. So the first chord is a major chord. By the way, that's what, if you want to designate a major chord, you just don't put anything next to it. You just put capital C. That means C major chord or triad. D with a little M next to it is minor. Sometimes you'll see D, M-I-N. Sometimes you'll see like a line next to it. E little M is E minor. F is F major. G is G major. A little m is A minor. B, D-I-M is B diminished. There is a different symbol for diminished. It's like a little degree symbol, a little superscript degree symbol, like 170 degrees. We won't worry about that symbol for now. I'm just going to put D-I-M for now, but we'll get to that later. And then the last note starts all over again. One thing another term I want you to be familiar with is the word tonic. The tonic is the first note of a scale, as the more or less the root of the key and the root of the scale that the song is in. Individually, chords do not have tonics. Chords have root notes. So the root note of a D minor chord is D. So when I use the term root, that's what I mean. When I use the word tonic, I mean the actual tonic of the scale or a key of the song. Getting back to the chords, though, this is the pattern that all major scales, all major chord progressions follow within their subsequent scales. It's major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. Notice that D major is identical. The chords are different chords, but the quality of the chord is the same. You're probably thinking, man, that's a lot of work. And like I said before, there's actually an easier way to figure all of this out that we'll discuss later on down the road. I just want you guys to be familiar with figuring out scales using this whole step, half step pattern. So let me show you something real quick that's kind of something cool you can do with just knowing this little bit of information. Just grabbing a piece of blank staff paper, writing out a scale, figuring out the chords over each note of the scale, and then what you can do is you can grab a few of those chords and build a rough musical idea with it, a rough song with it. Just to keep things super simple for today, I'll stick with C major. All right, so off screen, I created a very rough interpretation of Eddie Money's Take Me Home Tonight, just the first part of the chorus, using the chords that we just discovered using C major. So the chords in this song are C major, G, A minor, and then F. So not only did we figure out all of the chords in the key of C major that we could use, we're only using 4 of those chords to build this song out. And the entire melody only uses notes within the C major scale. So nothing in this musical example has any sharps or flats in it whatsoever. So you can see here, it's a little difficult to look at because it's split up over multiple staffs. And it's played with both the left hand and the right hand, but you have C major, which is C, G, C, E, G. And notes can be repeated, by the way. Just because there's more than 3 notes in the chord doesn't mean that it can't be a C major chord. Right now we have C, G, C, E, G. So we just have C and G repeated twice. The next chord you can see is bass clef down here, G, D, G, B, D. And then we have A, E, A, C, E, which is A minor. And then we have F, C, F, A, C. So again, don't worry so much about the chords at this point. I just wanted to throw that at you to let you know that you can use just this whole step, half step method to figure out any scale and figure out all of the chords that are associated with the key of that scale. So let me play this simple little example here of Eddie Money's Take Me Home Tonight. And unfortunately, I can't go any further than that in this song because the chords actually change. But that's a perfect example of the big hook of a very, very well-known pop rock track that literally only uses 4 chords. So the original song is not in C major from what I remember. I think it's like in B major or something like that. But you can use just C major and 4 chords to create a cool hook. Use the notes within C major as a cool vocal melody. So it's a matter of playing around right at this point and creating some cool ideas. So in future videos, I'll show you guys how to come up with vocal melodies and chord progressions a little more easy than we did it in this video. But I just wanted to sort of give you an introduction to major scales and major key structure. And in the next video, we'll talk about minor scales and minor key structure. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.